Energy is the one thing no one can give, borrow, or replenish for you. Every obligation you accept, every conversation you pour yourself into without thought, chips away at it, leaving a quiet fatigue that lingers long after the day ends. Yet we act as if it is infinite, pouring ourselves into the world while forgetting that clarity, peace, and focus are the true measures of a life well lived. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that his mind and judgments were his own fortress, and no one could breach it unless he allowed them to. Imagine moving through your day with the ability to guard your energy, to honor it like the precious currency it is, without guilt or apology. That discipline does not make you cold or distant. It makes you resilient. It allows you to be fully present where it matters and unattached where it doesn't. The strength to choose where you give and where you withhold is not arrogance, it is mastery over self. Mastery over self is freedom. Sometimes the heaviest burdens aren't visible. They are the expectations, the noise, the obligations we accept without thought, the energy we surrender unconsciously. Every interaction chips away at our clarity, yet most of us move through life as if our energy is limitless, only to wonder why we feel drained, distracted, or disconnected. True strength is not in bending to every call or request, but in mastering the quiet discipline of choice, the power to preserve peace while moving through the world with intention. Consider the moments when someone's words leave space for thought, a pause where your mind can settle and breathe. You finish a conversation and feel a subtle weightlessness, a sense that your inner world has room to stretch. That feeling is rare, yet unmistakable when it comes. Other times, interactions feel heavy, each word tugging at some hidden reserve of attention, leaving subtle fatigue that lingers long after the moment has passed. This is not accidental. It is the reflection of an invisible economy of energy, a transaction in which we are both unwilling and unaware participants. Each exchange either restores or depletes, expands the spirit or contracts it, and the difference often lies not in what is said, but in what is held within us before, during, and after. Boundaries determine the flow. When they are clear, energy circulates with purpose. When they blur, it leaks unnoticed, carried off by the expectations, anxieties, and unconscious demands of others. The act of defining these boundaries is not an imposition. It is a declaration of self-respect. Drawing a line between what is yours to carry and what is not does not make you harsh or distant. It makes you deliberate. Stoicism reminds us that disturbance does not come from events themselves, but from how we interpret and judge them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Energy is not just physical, it is mental, emotional, and spiritual. Allowing it to be borrowed indiscriminately is equivalent to surrendering clarity for the comfort or convenience of someone else. Many of us respond automatically, saying yes reflexively, overextending, over-explaining, and assuming resources are inexhaustible. Yet no moment exists without consequence. Every gesture, every word, every mental commitment requires energy, and that energy is finite, precious, and profoundly tied to the life you are capable of living. Reflection begins with observation. Some people drain without malice, not because they seek to harm, but because they are themselves unmoored, seeking nourishment where it cannot rightly be found. Others drain through habit, expectation, or unexamined assumptions. In all cases, the failure to protect oneself stems from failing to recognize the flow of energy as tangible and essential. Each conversation, request, or obligation is an investment, one that will either yield clarity and growth or leave residues of exhaustion and tension. The deliberate assessment of interactions allows the mind to hold what matters at arm's length while engaging where it is meaningful. Energy, like virtue, cannot be dispensed carelessly without consequence. There is a temporal dimension to this as well. Energy is spent in the moment, but its effects ripple forward, coloring subsequent encounters and shaping future choices. The memory of drained moments, the habitual fatigue imposed by repeated lack of boundaries, alters perception, diminishes patience, and reduces the capacity for reasoned judgment. When the mind is already taxed, responses are automatic rather than intentional, reactive rather than deliberate. By establishing and maintaining clear boundaries, energy circulates in patterns that sustain both engagement and detachment as necessary. This mirrors the Stoic approach to impulse and desire. Freedom arises from mastery over what lies within control, and fatigue comes from surrender to what lies outside it. Living by this principle is not abstention from life, it is participation from a place of clarity. Self-awareness is central to this process. Internal drains, anxiety about judgment, imagined obligations, or compulsive comparison often consume more energy than external demands. Stoicism teaches that the mind shapes reality. If attention is surrendered unconsciously to worry or regret, energy is spent before action begins. Practices such as meditation, journaling, stillness, or immersion in nature serve to reset the internal landscape. They allow reflection without reaction, observation without depletion, and presence without fatigue. By recognizing patterns of unconscious energy expenditure, you reclaim agency. You stop allowing subtle drains to dictate your focus, mood, or decision-making. Integration of these insights transforms experience. Protecting energy is not avoidance. It is the deliberate allocation of presence where it matters. It is the choice to engage fully in relationships, work, and projects where impact is real, and to abstain from those that offer little return. Living by your own measure, rather than by constant demands of expectation, preserves clarity and cultivates freedom. Each moment of intentional engagement strengthens resilience, sharpens focus, and nurtures the mind's capacity for deliberate action. The daily exercise of conscious choice over attention becomes both practical and philosophical, a reflection of Stoic mastery over self and circumstance. As you consider your day, your week, your interactions, reflect on what consumes your energy unnecessarily, what deserves your full presence. Each reclaimed moment is a step toward clarity, autonomy, and freedom. By protecting energy, you safeguard the mind, the body, and the capacity to act in alignment with values. Presence that is consciously allocated is power. Life navigated with this awareness becomes deliberate rather than reactive, intentional rather than dispersed. If you want to continue sharpening this skill, learning how to protect your energy, reinforce your boundaries, and live with clarity and purpose, consider subscribing. Subscribing here is a choice to prioritize your own growth, to honor your mind and your presence, and to take another step toward living intentionally and freely. The practical implications are subtle but profound. Awareness of the flow of energy enables discernment about relationships, obligations, and commitments. It allows one to invest selectively, to extend presence where it can be meaningful and withheld where it cannot. There is a deep paradox here. Saying no to some things, declining certain exchanges, is not an act of withdrawal from the world, but a conscious redirection toward life in which one's contributions are more authentic, more present, more potent. Every decision to permit or refuse energy flow shapes the environment in which thought, creativity, and action can flourish. The discipline to observe and act in this way transforms interactions from draining cycles into opportunities for renewal and growth. And the most profound lesson is that these choices need not depend on external circumstances. They are available to anyone willing to examine, to reflect, and to act with deliberation. Self-reflection, in this regard, is a continuous process. The Stoics advise the daily practice of examining one's own thoughts, responses, and engagements, recognizing the difference between what can and cannot be controlled. Epictetus wrote, It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Every conversation, every interaction becomes an occasion for the exercise of judgment. Not all energy drains are caused by malice or manipulation. Many arise from habitual patterns, expectations, and the unconscious habits of both self and others. The crucial insight is the recognition of one's own responsibility in these flows. If exhaustion is a repeated consequence, it is necessary to ask not only who is involved, but what role one plays in allowing this outcome, what patterns can be observed, and how they might be interrupted to preserve clarity and presence. Awareness of the subtle economy of energy also cultivates a form of equanimity. By observing without judgment, without overreaction, the mind can distinguish between what deserves attention and what does not. Emotional fatigue, irritation, or distraction become data rather than directives. The observation itself is an act of liberation. It separates the self from automatic depletion, creating space to choose responses consciously. This practice aligns closely with Stoic cultivation of inner freedom, an understanding that while the external world remains unpredictable, the management of one's mind, attention, and presence is always within reach. The preservation of energy is not avoidance, it is mastery. It is a quiet, deliberate cultivation of the capacity to act and to live fully. Ultimately, the recognition of energy as a limited, valuable resource reframes interactions. To move through life with awareness is to notice not only the depletion imposed by others, but also the inadvertent drains imposed by self-neglect, distraction, and misplaced priorities. Energy becomes the measure of engagement, and boundaries become the instruments by which it is protected and directed. Carl Jung observed that your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The awaking is the recognition that self-respect, clarity, and presence are inseparable from the mindful stewardship of energy. To ignore this is to drift, reactive and spent. To embrace it is to live deliberately, with intention, and with the freedom to act in alignment with one's values. By attending to the flow of energy, by observing interactions and outcomes, and by making deliberate choices about where and how presence is given, the mind cultivates resilience, insight, and the ability to act purposefully. The awareness of energy as currency creates a framework for relationships, commitments, and daily engagements, transforming the mundane into the meaningful. Each choice is both a reflection of inner strength and an investment in future capacity, ensuring that the spirit is not diminished by thoughtless dispersion. In the subtle practice of observing, reflecting, and protecting, life gains coherence, focus, and a sense of quiet power. The mastery of one's own energy is the mastery of one's life, the cultivation of freedom, and the realization of the Stoic principle that the only true control we possess is over the self, over the mind, and over the careful stewardship of our own attention and presence. Every interaction, every request, and every obligation carries with it a cost. Energy is a currency most of us spend carelessly, assuming it will always replenish itself. A text that demands immediate attention, a call that stretches beyond necessity, an obligation that feels unavoidable. All of these are small withdrawals from a finite account, one that the mind, body, and spirit draw upon continuously. Yet, unlike money, this currency is invisible. Its depletion is subtle, almost imperceptible at first, and it leaves traces that accumulate quietly until we find ourselves exhausted, distracted, and unmoored. When energy is surrendered without awareness, it does not merely leave us tired, it erodes our ability to engage meaningfully, to act intentionally, and to respond wisely to what truly matters. The cost is often disguised as politeness, loyalty, or duty, and few pause long enough to calculate the toll. The subtlety of this loss is what makes it so dangerous and what makes awareness so essential. The perception of energy as limitless is a convenient illusion. Many move through life under the belief that their focus and attention can stretch indefinitely, that time itself is elastic, and that their capacity to meet expectations is boundless. This illusion encourages overcommitment, and in doing so, disguises the subtle consequences of overextension. The clarity and calm necessary for reasoned judgment erode slowly, like sand slipping through fingers. One obligation may feel manageable and another still tolerable, but each leaves an imperceptible residue until the cumulative effect impairs discernment, decision-making, and the ability to maintain perspective. Awareness of this cumulative impact is essential. Observing the pattern of how obligations, demands, and distractions affect mental and emotional energy is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy. Without this observation, the mind becomes reactive and the individual unmoored. The social dimension compounds the challenge. Expectations are imposed by others, consciously or unconsciously, and the pressure to conform, please, or maintain appearances can override self-directed choice. Cultural norms, professional obligations, and interpersonal dynamics create a dense network of subtle coercion. Energy in this context is constantly contested, and without vigilance, it flows outward, leaving the individual depleted. Awareness of these dynamics allows for strategic engagement, choosing which demands merit response, which conversations warrant attention, and which obligations can be deferred or declined. This strategy is not withdrawal or avoidance, it is deliberate management, the application of judgment, and the recognition of finite resources. Each interaction is an investment, and wise management ensures that the balance remains positive, not negative. Reflection upon past experiences often reveals patterns. Moments of exhaustion, distraction, or regret frequently trace back to choices made automatically, under pressure, or in service of external expectations. The realization that energy has been surrendered unconsciously can be uncomfortable, even painful, but it is also liberating. It reveals the possibility of intentional living, choosing engagement, refusing unnecessary depletion, and cultivating practices that sustain clarity. The discipline to observe, to pause, and to respond deliberately is the cornerstone of energy preservation. Over time, this practice strengthens discernment, allowing one to differentiate between what is necessary and what is imposed, between what is nourishing and what is draining. Self-responsibility is central. While others may request, demand, or expect, the choice to comply rests ultimately within the individual. Energy cannot be stolen without consent. It can only be expended with willingness. Recognizing this shifts the locus of control inward, providing freedom where there was previously a sense of obligation or compulsion. The deliberate exercise of this freedom is not selfishness. It is stewardship of the self. Each refusal, each pause, each conscious allocation of attention is an act of preservation and empowerment. The awareness that one can choose where energy flows changes the dynamic from one of exhaustion to one of agency, and transforms interactions from automatic depletion to deliberate engagement. Ultimately, the careful management of attention and energy is both practical and philosophical. It is practical because it enables more effective action, sharper focus, and sustainable engagement with life's demands. It is philosophical because it embodies the Stoic principle that the self is the only domain of true control. The discipline to respond rather than react, to allocate energy intentionally, and to observe the effects of each interaction cultivates freedom, presence, and resilience. Awareness transforms ordinary moments into opportunities to exercise judgment, reinforce boundaries, and strengthen the capacity to act in alignment with values. In recognizing that energy is finite, observing its flow, and making deliberate choices, the individual cultivates autonomy, clarity, and the ability to engage with life on terms that honor the self. Seneca reminds us, It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. Energy mirrors this sentiment. It is not lacking, but often dissipated without thought. By attending to how it is spent, we reclaim presence, cultivate focus, and assert the boundaries necessary for a life of clarity, purpose, and resilience. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to exercise judgment, every obligation a chance to align with values, and every pause a moment of stewardship over what truly matters. When energy is managed consciously, the mind is freed from distraction, the spirit from exhaustion, and the life from fragmentation, creating space for growth, intention, and the authentic expression of self. Some people walk into a room and leave a trace, not a mark on the floor, but a mark on your mind, a shift in the atmosphere that feels almost magnetic. Their presence sparks thought, ignites possibility, and leaves a sense of lightness, as if the world has been subtly rearranged in a more harmonious pattern. Other people, equally present in physical space, leave a different trace. There is weight in the words, tension in the pauses, and an invisible tug that pulls at focus and attention. Energy is exchanged in these encounters, often unconsciously. One is replenished, the other is depleted. The distinction is rarely about malice or intent. It is a reflection of awareness, reciprocity, and alignment. It is also a mirror reflecting the choices we make about how we engage, how much we give, and how much we allow to be taken. Relationships are rarely one-sided in reality, but they often feel so. The habit of overextending oneself, of giving more than one can spare in an effort to maintain harmony or avoid conflict, subtly corrodes the self. Each compromise or extra effort carries energy that is not easily reclaimed. There is no immediate consequence, no ledger to tally the balance, yet the depletion is real, accumulating silently. This is why it is crucial to examine not only the character of others, but also our own patterns of interaction. Are we inadvertently enabling energy takers? Are we complicit in the depletion by prioritizing social ease over our own presence and focus? Awareness is the first corrective. By observing the dynamics, we recognize the flows of energy as both reciprocal and finite, giving power to choose how and where it is directed. To observe without judgment is to gain insight. Stoicism teaches that external events are neutral. It is the mind that assigns value, significance, and reaction. The presence of a person who drains or energizes does not inherently carry weight. It is the judgment, the absorption, and the consent to give away attention and vitality that create the effect. Carl Jung noted, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." The unconscious patterns of over-giving, over-pleasing, and overextending are precisely what allow others to extract energy without notice. By bringing these tendencies into conscious awareness, one transforms the flow from passive depletion to active choice. Each encounter becomes a deliberate decision about presence and engagement, not an automatic drain on reserves. Patterns emerge when energy is spent reflexively. Social conditioning, habits of empathy, and early lessons in obligation teach the mind that attention must be freely given, even at the cost of self. Repeatedly following this pattern teaches the body and mind to operate at diminished capacity, creating a baseline of fatigue that colors subsequent encounters. One does not merely feel drained in isolated moments. The state accumulates, a subtle but persistent erosion of mental clarity and emotional stability. Recognizing the cumulative effect transforms perception. It is no longer about isolated interactions, but about understanding the architecture of energy flow within one's life, seeing how each relationship, task, and expectation shapes the internal landscape. Awareness allows one to shift from passive participation to intentional stewardship. There is also a temporal aspect to consider. Each interaction influences not only the immediate moment, but subsequent engagement. Draining encounters leave residues of distraction, irritation, or diminished focus that affect subsequent relationships, work, and reflection. Conversely, restorative interactions amplify capacity, leaving traces of inspiration, calm, and presence that extend far beyond the initial encounter. By tracking these patterns, consciously observing the energetic impact of each person, and considering the cumulative effects over days and weeks, one begins to discern which relationships amplify clarity and which erode it. The discipline is in noticing early, before depletion has compounded, and adjusting engagement accordingly. Accountability for one's own role is central. It is easy to blame others for exhaustion or frustration, but the Stoic perspective emphasizes mastery over the self. Over-engagement is not merely a result of external demands, it is a choice, often habitual and unconscious. By recognizing the moments when attention is given reflexively, when presence is extended automatically, one can reclaim agency. Energy is never stolen, it is allowed. Choosing where, when, and to whom energy is extended constitutes both a practical and ethical framework for living. Each decision to engage with awareness reinforces autonomy and cultivates resilience. This awareness transforms relationships from drains into dialogues, from obligation into opportunity. Finally, reflection on these dynamics fosters a sense of equilibrium. Energy is finite, and its preservation is essential for clarity, focus, and fulfillment. By observing patterns of depletion and replenishment, consciously deciding where attention flows, and maintaining boundaries that respect one's own limits, life becomes more intentional and coherent. Moments of engagement gain significance, while distractions and drains are managed with clarity rather than reaction. The interplay between self-awareness, reflection, and choice creates a structure in which relationships are navigated deliberately, energy is preserved, and personal capacity is strengthened. Through this practice, the mind cultivates stability, the spirit cultivates resilience, and each interaction becomes an opportunity to exercise discernment and presence in alignment with values. Energy is not merely borrowed or stolen by others. More often, it seeps away through our own unexamined habits. Every time a commitment is accepted out of fear, every moment of silence held to avoid judgment, every ounce of effort spent to prove worthiness. These are the subtle leaks that quietly erode vitality. They are imperceptible at first, disguised as duty, loyalty, or kindness. Yet over time they compound into a persistent undercurrent of exhaustion that diminishes clarity and weakens presence. The mind becomes foggy, decisions feel heavier, and the body carries a tension that is never truly released. The failure to notice these internal drains is often mistaken for the whims of others, when in reality, much of this energy was surrendered with consent, unconsciously, before the external circumstances even played their part. Practices of self-observation and reflection are essential. Journaling, meditation, and mindful pauses offer insight into patterns of surrender, illuminating moments when energy was ceded unnecessarily. These moments are not failures. They are opportunities for learning and adjustment. By recording the circumstances under which energy was drained, and by identifying the internal motivations that allowed it, one cultivates clarity regarding the distinction between obligation and choice, between external imposition and internal consent. The capacity to differentiate these forces strengthens autonomy and fosters a measured, deliberate approach to interactions, commitments, and daily routines. It also enables one to reclaim presence and assert boundaries without guilt, aligning behavior with values rather than reflexive response. Reclaiming energy through awareness does not necessitate withdrawal or disengagement. It requires discernment and the courage to exercise choice. Silence is no longer a product of fear, and presence is no longer a product of compulsion. Decisions about where to invest energy become deliberate, aligning with purpose and necessity rather than automatic habit. The individual gains capacity to participate fully in interactions that are meaningful while abstaining from those that are draining or misaligned with priorities. This practice mirrors Stoic exercises in judgment, the discernment of what lies within one's control and the acceptance of what does not. Energy, when consciously preserved and allocated, becomes a tool for deliberate action rather than a resource expended unconsciously. The role of internal perception is paramount. The mind interprets every encounter, shaping its significance and impact. When energy is surrendered automatically, perception aligns with exhaustion, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. By bringing awareness to these unconscious habits, the cycle is interrupted. The individual learns to recognize the difference between legitimate engagement and reflexive expenditure of effort. Decisions are informed by observation, reflection, and the deliberate assessment of consequences. Energy is no longer a passive resource at the mercy of circumstance, but an active instrument of intention. This internal vigilance cultivates resilience, steadiness, and clarity, allowing for participation in life without being diminished by habitual surrender. Finally, energy stewardship becomes a form of self-respect and ethical practice. Each moment of recognition, each decision to reclaim what was previously surrendered, strengthens autonomy and reinforces boundaries. It is not selfishness to protect one's own presence. It is a fundamental requirement for integrity, for clarity of action, and for the capacity to engage authentically. The patterns of internal leakage are illuminated through disciplined attention and thoughtful reflection, providing the opportunity to act deliberately rather than reactively. In this process, freedom is regained, presence is restored, and the mind is fortified. As Marcus Aurelius observed, control over the self is the only true power, and by stewarding energy wisely, one exercises that power with deliberate intention. Recognition of internal drains completes the foundation for deliberate engagement. By acknowledging that exhaustion and depletion often originate from habitual choices rather than external impositions, the individual gains agency over interactions, commitments, and daily actions. Conscious stewardship transforms previously invisible losses into deliberate allocation, ensuring that energy is preserved, presence is sustained, and life is lived with intention. Each interaction, each decision, and each pause becomes an opportunity to reinforce boundaries, protect clarity, and exercise judgment. In this way, internal awareness becomes both the shield and the compass for navigating the complexities of life, preserving vitality and cultivating freedom, presence, and intentional living. Boundaries are often misunderstood. They are not walls built to isolate or punish. They are lines drawn in service of clarity, in service of presence. Each time attention is given, each moment spent, each ounce of effort extended, it communicates to both ourselves and others what is available, what is possible, and what is meaningful. When boundaries are absent, energy is diffused indiscriminately, scattered across countless demands, obligations, and expectations. The mind becomes restless, the body fatigued, and presence is diminished. Life proceeds as a series of reactions rather than deliberate actions, and every moment of giving without awareness carries a hidden cost. To recognize where one ends and others begin is to reclaim autonomy, to assert ownership over the finite currency of attention and presence. It is to move through the world not as a conduit for others' needs, but as a steward of what one can genuinely offer. Discipline in this context is not punitive, it is liberating. The Stoics recognized that true freedom arises not from the absence of constraint, but from mastery over the self. By defining limits and honoring them, one establishes the conditions under which energy can be invested meaningfully. Saying no is not an act of cruelty or detachment, it is an act of wisdom. Each refusal clarifies the contours of availability, signaling to others the scope of engagement that can be met with full attention and integrity. The paradox of presence is that by reserving energy, one becomes more fully present where it is allocated. Scattered attention produces diluted engagement. Conscious allocation produces depth. To invest selectively is not selfishness. It is a recognition that attention and effort are finite resources and must be directed with deliberation. The tension between desire to please and need for preservation is subtle but powerful. Many of the drains on energy arise from the compulsion to respond affirmatively, to accommodate requests, to fulfill expectations that are not aligned with one's priorities. In doing so, energy is expended preemptively, leaving less available for what truly matters. Reflection and awareness illuminate this dynamic. Each moment of compromise or overextension teaches a lesson about capacity, priority, and self-respect. The clarity provided by boundaries allows one to approach interactions and obligations with intention rather than reflexive compliance. When energy is managed consciously, every engagement becomes an opportunity for meaningful presence rather than depletion. The disciplined mind recognizes that presence is valuable and that each moment of attention carries weight that should not be squandered. Consider the implications for relationships. When boundaries are undefined, interactions can become cycles of misalignment and fatigue. Others may unknowingly impose upon attention, assuming availability or consent where none was deliberately granted. This dynamic is not a moral failing on their part, but a reflection of the absence of clarity. Conversely, defined boundaries communicate intent, availability, and expectation, allowing interactions to proceed with mutual understanding. The presence given under these conditions is fuller, richer, and more effective. Energy is not dispersed across irrelevant channels, but concentrated where it can generate growth, connection, and impact. The clarity that arises from boundaries cultivates respect, understanding, and authenticity in both the self and others. Energy is inseparable from judgment and discernment. The ability to observe where attention is invested and to make conscious choices about what is permitted to consume it is a practice of self-governance. Decisions regarding engagement are not arbitrary. They are informed by awareness of capacity, priorities, and purpose. Aristotle noted that virtue involves moderation and deliberate choice, and the management of energy mirrors this principle. The disciplined allocation of presence allows one to maintain alignment with values, to act in accordance with purpose, and to avoid unnecessary depletion. Each engagement becomes intentional, each refusal considered, each investment of energy deliberate. Presence is not reactive but directed, not scattered but coherent. The subtle power of boundaries extends beyond interpersonal relationships to every dimension of life. Work, projects, creative endeavors, and commitments all compete for attention, and without clarity, energy is fragmented. Prioritization becomes meaningless if attention is extended indiscriminately. The clarity provided by boundaries enables focus, concentration, and depth, allowing effort to generate meaningful outcomes rather than dissipating in unfocused exertion. Discipline in defining where energy is directed is thus both practical and philosophical. It aligns daily action with long-term values, ensuring that the expenditure of attention serves purpose rather than obligation. Presence, invested consciously, compounds its impact. Psychologically, boundaries create safety within which growth can occur. When limits are established and honored, the mind is free to engage fully without fear of overextension or distraction. Emotional and mental reserves are preserved, allowing creativity, insight, and resilience to emerge naturally. The absence of boundaries produces subtle anxiety, the sense that one is always behind, always stretched, and never fully present. By contrast, deliberate boundaries provide a framework within which energy is replenished and applied effectively. The individual becomes a source of intentional presence rather than a passive participant in the demands of circumstance. Reflection before commitment is not avoidance, it is stewardship. Each interaction with another person is a potential exchange of energy, attention, and influence, and the decision to participate should not be made lightly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to meet people as they are, not as he wished them to be. The principle applies beyond interpersonal encounters. It extends to every obligation, every request, and every moment demanding response. The recognition that one cannot fully control the actions or expectations of others shifts the focus to what is within control. The choice to respond with awareness, the allocation of presence, and the determination of boundaries. By embracing this perspective, engagement becomes intentional rather than reactive, preserving mental clarity and emotional equilibrium while still honoring obligations and relationships. Energy preservation through deliberate choice fosters resilience. When attention and effort are extended only where they are meaningful, the mind maintains focus and the spirit retains capacity for engagement. Without reflection, interactions tend to consume energy indiscriminately. Tasks accumulate, obligations overlap, and the subtle erosion of attention becomes normalized. The disciplined act of pausing, evaluating, and responding allows the individual to maintain alignment between action and values, avoiding the slow depletion that accompanies reactive participation. The pause itself is a signal of sovereignty over one's time and presence, a conscious reclamation of what is often surrendered automatically. It transforms each decision from a simple reaction into an act of agency, reinforcing the integrity of choice and reinforcing boundaries that protect clarity and energy. Weekly audits and reflective practices amplify this capacity. By examining what nourishes the mind and spirit and what drains them, patterns emerge that illuminate where energy is being expended wisely and where it is being wasted. Journaling, meditation, or simply quiet contemplation provide insight into the cumulative effects of commitments and interactions. When the mind is aware of these patterns, it can adjust engagement accordingly, selectively investing attention where it is restorative and meaningful, and withholding presence where it is depleting or misaligned. The habitual reflection cultivates foresight, enabling the individual to anticipate interactions that may impose unnecessary demands and to structure time and attention with precision. This practice transforms ordinary experience into an intentional exercise in energy stewardship. Boundaries, when enacted with clarity, are not acts of rejection but instruments of integrity. They communicate limits, expectations, and intention. Saying no, declining a request, or delaying response is not coldness. It is an assertion of alignment between action and purpose. By preserving energy, the individual enhances the capacity to participate fully and effectively in engagements that are significant. The discipline to reflect before committing establishes a standard for interaction, signaling that presence is valuable and finite, and that its distribution should be deliberate. This approach cultivates respect both inward and outward, creating conditions in which exchanges of attention and effort are balanced, reciprocal, and meaningful. The compassionate dimension of boundaries emerges from their role in sustaining presence rather than enforcing separation. When energy is managed consciously, interactions are approached with full awareness rather than distraction or fatigue. Engagement is deliberate, and the individual retains the capacity to listen, respond thoughtfully, and act with purpose. The clarity achieved through reflective practices does not reduce empathy or connection, it enhances it. One becomes fully present where attention is directed, capable of meaningful contribution, and able to navigate the complexities of interpersonal dynamics without losing stability or composure. The practice of pausing and reflecting ensures that presence is sustained and that energy is neither dissipated carelessly nor hoarded unnecessarily. Sovereignty over one's energy strengthens resilience against external pressures. The habitual tendency to comply automatically to meet expectations without assessment gradually diminishes the ability to act with intention. By integrating the pause, reflection, and deliberate choice into daily practice, the individual cultivates a buffer against reactive depletion, creating a sustainable pattern of engagement. Energy becomes a managed resource, attentively invested rather than inadvertently surrendered. This deliberate approach fosters confidence, clarity, and the ability to navigate demands and obligations without compromising inner stability. The mind and spirit retain capacity for creativity, insight, and meaningful action, while interactions and commitments align with values and priorities. The mind can be both a sanctuary and a battlefield. While external demands often draw attention and presence, the most insidious drains are those that arise from within. Anxiety about how others perceive us, the subtle compulsion to measure ourselves against imagined standards, and the constant pull of comparison all sap energy silently. They consume attention before any external interaction occurs, leaving the spirit fatigued even when the body has rested. Internal pressure is often less visible, yet more potent, because it disguises itself as thought, responsibility, or care. It masquerades as necessity while eroding focus, clarity, and motivation, leaving an ongoing residue that shapes perception and dictates responses. This quiet depletion is pervasive, infiltrating moments of decision, reflection, and creativity, and often goes unnoticed until the cumulative effect is unmistakable. Deliberate restorative practices are essential for resetting the internal landscape. Meditation anchors the mind, providing a space to observe without becoming entangled, to notice thought patterns without reacting reflexively. Journaling externalizes internal dialogue, allowing reflection and insight to clarify priorities and realign energy with purpose. Moments of stillness or immersion in nature provide a reset that reconnects mind, body, and environment, diminishing the weight of imagined obligations and diffuse concerns. These practices are not indulgences. They are essential instruments for energy management, allowing the mind to recover and return to action with presence and focus intact. The deliberate cultivation of calm and clarity within allows for engagement that is responsive rather than reactive. Internal pressures often manifest as subtle obligations: the anxiety of imagined expectations, the compulsion to perform for approval, or the anticipation of judgment. These forces are self-generated, yet they operate with the same intensity as external demands. By recognizing the source of these drains as internal, one gains agency. Energy previously lost to speculation, fear, and imagined scenarios can be reclaimed, preserved, and allocated intentionally. Reflection, the deliberate pause, and conscious assessment of internal pressures empower the individual to act in alignment with values rather than react to perceived obligation. It is the difference between living under compulsion and living with deliberate choice, between surrendering presence to imagined demands and directing attention to what truly matters. Comparison is a particularly corrosive internal drain. The mind constantly evaluates achievements, appearance, and attention relative to others, generating subtle dissatisfaction and anxiety. This comparison functions as a silent tax on energy, diverting focus from meaningful work and reflection. Stoic philosophy teaches that what is beyond one's control, others' thoughts, achievements, and judgments, should not dictate internal equilibrium. Attention given to external measures of value rather than the cultivation of virtue and mastery over self is energy expended on illusions. The discipline to disengage from comparison and to anchor value in deliberate action and integrity conserves vitality and fosters clarity. This internal recalibration allows engagement with life on one's own terms rather than in reaction to others' performance or perception. Intentional engagement with life emerges from these internal practices. By monitoring thought, identifying unnecessary drains, and applying restorative practices, energy is preserved and allocated strategically. Journaling, meditation, reflection, and stillness are not isolated acts. They are integrated into daily life as mechanisms for sustaining clarity and focus. When energy is deliberately managed, the mind operates from a foundation of presence rather than depletion. Actions are aligned with values, decisions are informed rather than reactive, and interactions are approached with full attention. The individual is empowered to respond rather than be swept away by internal or external pressures, cultivating resilience, calm, and meaningful engagement. Ultimately, internal energy management is inseparable from intentional living. Awareness of the subtle drains created by anxiety, fear, and imagined obligations provides the opportunity to reclaim presence and allocate attention deliberately. Energy preservation is not withdrawal or avoidance, but the foundation for authentic participation in life. By observing, reflecting, and practicing restorative methods, the mind and body regain capacity for focused action, creativity, and meaningful interaction. As Aristotle observed, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. The habit of cultivating internal clarity ensures that each moment is engaged fully, that energy is preserved, and that life is navigated with deliberation, presence, and integrity. Internal mastery transforms energy from a passive resource into an instrument of intentional living, sustaining focus, resilience, and freedom across every dimension of experience. The final measure of energy protection lies not in isolation, but in deliberate integration. It is not a retreat from life, but a conscious engagement with it, a measured presence that ensures each interaction, task, and moment receives attention where it is warranted and is withheld where it is not. To protect energy is not to avoid responsibility or opportunity, but to allocate attention with intention, to invest presence in alignment with purpose rather than reflexively responding to expectation. Each decision becomes an exercise in discernment, the choice to speak or remain silent, to act or defer, to extend attention or conserve it. This is the practice of self-mastery, the cultivation of presence as a resource that is both finite and sacred. Living by one's own measure requires honest assessment of priorities and values. When energy is spent indiscriminately, the mind is fragmented, focus is diluted, and the capacity for deliberate action diminishes. The demands of others, whether explicit or implied, exert a gravitational pull on attention, and without awareness, they can dominate experience. Reflection, however, provides the lens through which allocation becomes conscious. By observing where energy is being expended and considering whether it aligns with purpose, the individual gains the capacity to choose engagement rather than be swept into obligation. It is a discipline of observation, evaluation, and deliberate action that transforms interactions from sources of depletion into opportunities for meaningful contribution. Integration also requires recognition that energy is cumulative. Every moment of unnecessary expenditure, every encounter in which presence is given without thought, compounds to produce fatigue, distraction, and diminished clarity. The habitual sacrifice of energy to external pressures or imagined obligations sets a baseline of exhaustion that undermines both judgment and well-being. By becoming aware of these patterns, energy can be reclaimed. Moments previously surrendered reflexively are now allocated with intention. Decisions about presence, attention, and action are informed by awareness of both capacity and consequence. Each act of deliberate engagement reinforces autonomy, preserves clarity, and cultivates resilience, allowing the mind and body to operate from a foundation of strength rather than depletion. The discernment of what deserves attention and what does not is central to this practice. Obligations, interactions, and relationships vary in their energy demands and their impact. Some situations require full presence, focus, and deliberate action. Others do not. By evaluating the potential return on energy investment, one ensures that attention is concentrated where it will yield meaningful outcomes, rather than diffused across irrelevant or unproductive demands. This discernment is neither avoidance nor indifference. It is wisdom in the allocation of presence. The mind and spirit are preserved through intentional engagement, and clarity emerges from the consistent practice of mindful distribution. Internal reflection amplifies this process. By examining the sources of depletion, the habits that unconsciously consume attention, and the patterns of interaction that either restore or drain energy, the individual cultivates insight. This insight informs decisions about engagement, enabling proactive rather than reactive presence. Meditation, journaling, and contemplative reflection provide tools for observing these patterns and recalibrating allocation accordingly. When attention is directed consciously, the energy spent aligns with purpose, priorities, and values, transforming everyday experience into deliberate practice. The internal landscape becomes a map for external action, guiding choice, presence, and contribution. Integration also requires recognition of limits. Energy is finite, and attempts to exceed capacity result in diminished effectiveness, increased fatigue, and impaired judgment. The discipline of self-awareness allows for the identification of natural boundaries, ensuring that presence is neither overextended nor misapplied. The conscious acknowledgement of limits is not weakness. It is a recognition of the finite nature of attention and the necessity of conserving it for meaningful engagement. Each pause, each refusal, and each decision to withhold presence is an act of preservation, reinforcing the capacity for deliberate, impactful action. The practice of deliberate energy allocation cultivates autonomy and freedom. By reclaiming moments that were previously surrendered unconsciously, the individual strengthens control over experience. Life is no longer dictated by external expectation or habitual reflex. It is directed by conscious choice. Each engagement becomes purposeful, each decision aligned with values, and each boundary an affirmation of self-sovereignty. In this way, energy protection transcends practical necessity and becomes an expression of philosophy, a lived application of Stoic principles in which the self is both steward and beneficiary of attention, presence, and deliberate action. Ultimately, the mastery of one's energy is inseparable from mastery over self. It is the recognition that freedom is not found in the absence of obligation, but in the deliberate exercise of judgment regarding engagement, attention, and presence. Energy is neither limitless nor inexhaustible, and each moment that is reclaimed, each boundary that is respected, and each decision to invest attention consciously reinforces autonomy, resilience, and clarity. Epictetus observed that no man is free who is not master of himself. By directing energy with intention, by choosing engagement wisely, and by cultivating discernment in every interaction, the individual transforms experience from a series of obligations into a canvas of deliberate, meaningful action, preserving presence, protecting clarity, and sustaining the capacity to live fully, freely, and intentionally. Take a deep breath and let this sink in. Your energy is yours to steward, your presence is yours to command, and your clarity is yours to protect. Every moment you reclaim, every boundary you honor, every choice you make with intention strengthens the life you are capable of living. You do not owe anyone your exhaustion, your scattered attention, or your unrest. What you do owe yourself is presence, purpose, and the freedom to act aligned with your values. Carry that awareness with you and let it guide every interaction, every commitment, every decision. And as you continue on this path, explore the video on your screen. It dives deeper into how discipline, reflection, and daily practices can transform your mind and your life from reactive to intentional.